A Rose for Miss Irwin by C. L. Brasch. Spring in North Carolina is simply beautiful, and the spring of 1961 was no exception. April of that year was particularly lovely. The azaleas and dogwoods were radiant, and the gardenias and lilacs were fragrant. In that vein, in Marshville, about 36 miles southeast of Charlotte, young Davy was on constant watch for fresh spring gardenias and lilacs that he had not yet discovered. His North Charlotte neighborhood, Beechwood Acres, was enveloped each day in foul-smelling auto and truck exhaust from the new Charlotte bypass, Interstate 85. He lived to escape North Charlotte and visit pastoral Marshville. Davy's favorite place in Marshville to search for his aromatic wonders was behind Grandpa Jake's Gulf Station on lightly traveled US 74. Davy may not always have discovered a new gardenia or lilac bush behind the old service station, but he always did find at least one or two bottle caps. For some reason, and no one knew quite why, Davy was absolutely fascinated with bottle caps. He was not partial to any particular brand, mind you. He collected partial cork bottle caps from Cheerwine, Sundrop, Knee High, Royal Crown, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Orange Crush soda pops, among others. He used a blue oil rag from the station to shine up each cap, and he placed each one in the right pocket of his dungarees. From that point, no one knew where the bottle caps ended up. But nearly everyone in Union County knew Davy collected bottle caps, so there was a fairly constant stream of colorful characters bringing them into the station for him. In truth, the most colorful character was Hank Travers. Hank was a delightful old gent with white wisps of hair dancing over his head. No one knew how old he really was, including Hank. Still, he always had a smile on his face for Davy and a bottle cap in his pocket. The three fates dictated that Hank should pay a call to the Gulf Station on a clear April day. Hank swung the front door open and waved to Grandpa Jake behind the cash register. "Jake, I have found a new bottle cap for Davy." Being not quite 5 years old, blonde-haired Davy was easy for Hank to pick up and spin around in the air wildly. Both Davy and Hank squealed with delight the dizzier that Davy became. Grandpa Jake just smiled as he rang up a Sundrop for Hank, on the house. "Mr. Hank, I've missed you. Please show me that new bottle cap and I'll pick the rocks out of your greenhouse tomato garden. Honest." Hank and Grandpa Jake knew that Davy meant well, but they also knew that there would be more tomatoes eaten than rocks picked if Davy came visiting. Smiling as he popped open his Sundrop, Hank said, "Davy, I do appreciate that, but I think the fairies have already been by and picked all the rocks right out of my greenhouse. I woke up this morning and the rocks were gone, but my tomatoes were still intact." Davy's imagination raced. "Wow, that must have been fairies, Mr. Hank. Any person would have scarfed down a tomato or two from hunger after picking up so many rocks." "Exactly. Oh, and by the way, Davy, look what the fairies left behind in my greenhouse." Hank pulled an object out of his pocket, and it was a special object indeed. It was a classic cork bottle cap, but it was made of solid gold. Davy's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. "Jiminy Cricket, Mr. Hank, that is beautiful. I have never seen a bottle cap that shines and glistens like that. What kind of soda pop is that, and where did it come from?" Smiling, Hank handed over the golden bottle cap to the lad. "Well, Davy, those fairies are particularly good at keeping secrets, but I may have an inkling where that bottle cap came from. Would you like to see the place that made it?" Davy started to jump up and down like there were ants in his pants. "Golly gee, would I ever! It must be a magical place to make soda pop with golden caps, Mr. Hank." Mr. Hank smiled, thinking fondly of people and events from long ago. He spoke quietly, almost reverentially. "Yes, Davy, it is indeed. A very special lady lives there, in fact." Davy's curiosity was piqued as he moved around like a squirmworm. "Who, Mr. Hank? Who bottled that soda, and where does she live?" Hank smiled as he settled down in Grandpa Jake's wooden rocking chair in the station's sun-filled front room. "Miss Irwin bottled that homemade soda, Davy, and you will not believe where she lives. Do you know the deep woods behind your Mama Mac's old wooden house in the country?" "Gosh, yes. I've tried a zillion times to make it through those woods to the other side, but there is no other side. Those woods go on forever, Mr. Hank." "They stretch at least that far, Davy, but if you can make it past those woods, you will come up on a small clearing and a stand of chestnut trees. Miss Irwin lives there in a white clapboard house with an ample front porch. She'd be happy to meet you, Davy." Davy's eyes were wide with wonder. Golly, Mr. Hank, I'm going over to Mama Mac's tomorrow for black-eyed peas and cornbread. Maybe I can find Miss Irwin's house before lunch. Hank rubbed the young boy's blond burr head. Maybe you can, Davy. Your Mama Mac has a very good memory, and she may be able to help you. I think she and Miss Irwin were childhood friends long ago. Davy did not have a good grasp on time, but long ago had to be a fair piece. Mama Mac had two younger sisters, Aunt Gertrude and Aunt Ruby, who were 100 and 103 respectively. Both aunts still had a driver's license, although Mama Mac never bothered to get one. She simply walked everywhere, just as she had done since she was a little girl. Consequently, her hair never grayed and her heart never aged. Davy arrived at Mama Mac's country house just after sunrise the following morning. He could see her through a side window singing and cooking breakfast, and breakfast smelled good. The morning was misty and gray, so Davy raised his spirits by wandering through Mama's yard and smelling each azalea, lilac, and rose. Mama Mac's old rose bush beside the wooden house was almost his favorite. This bush perplexed him. Its red roses were impossibly colorful, but they had no fragrance. Davy spoke a thought. Gosh, I'll take one of these red roses to Miss Irwin and thank her for that golden bottle cap. That's the very least I can do for her. Davy picked an exceptionally lovely rose and scampered into the deep woods. He was so excited that he completely forgot to eat breakfast and to check in with Mama Mac to let her know where he was going. The cool gray mist made it difficult for Davy to discern any direction. Thus, he used dead reckoning. As the briars and brambles grew thicker, Davy figured he must be nearing the edge of the woods. Covered with more scratches and bug bites than skin, Davy trekked blindly through dense underbrush and pine needles for what seemed hours as the mist turned into a light rain. The soft southern pines gradually gave way to majestic chestnuts that heralded a bright new world. Davy finally stumbled out of the woods into brilliant sunlight and a grassy clearing. He heard a cacophony of bird songs and crickets chirping in stark contrast to the gray gloom of the deep woods. Just ahead, as Mr. Hank had promised, he spotted a white clapboard house with a spacious front porch. Davy could just make out the figure of a young girl rocking on the porch and simultaneously rubbing the head of an eager yellow Labrador retriever puppy. She waved at him to come closer as her dog barked. Davy ran through the tall grass toward the front porch. A 10-year-old girl stood up wearing a lightweight cotton day dress with a pink dotted pattern on a white background. It had a cotton-lined bodice, bell-shaped sleeves, printed ruffles, and a piped waist. Davy had never before seen the likes of it. The girl had ginger hair and ruddy cheeks. She greeted him with a smile and a firm handshake, and her puppy jumped into his arms and proceeded to lick him to death. Top of the morning to you. I'm Miss Irwin of Union County, and this is Johnny. Who might you be with all your scratches and chigger bites? Davy looked a mess, and he replied a bit sheepishly. I'm Esther Davy from North Charlotte, and I apologize for not cleaning up better, ma'am, but this is the first time I've made it here through the deep woods. Miss Irwin stared at the edge of the forest. Yes, those woods are thick as molasses. My pa had a dickens of a time clearing the field to that point, but what brings you here through those woods, Master Davy? With unwanted help from Johnny, Davy fished through his right dungaree's pocket for his golden treasure. Here, Mr. Hank gave this to me, and he said that he thought it came from you. Miss Irwin furrowed her brow and inspected the golden cork cap with care. Well, Davy, I certainly recognize the cork cap from one of my sarsaparilla sodas, and I surely know that young rascal Hank Travers, but I have never yet turned one of my caps into solid gold. That is one fine piece of leprechaun magic indeed, lad. Davy felt proud to have such a treasure, but he knew it must stay with its rightful owner. Miss Irwin, that is a peachy cork cap, but it is yours and Johnny's. I wanted to be sure to bring it back to you. Johnny thanked Davy with a loud bark that nearly split his eardrums. That's right honest of you, Davy. Johnny and I will hold on to it as a keepsake until next we all meet again. Why don't you come sit with us for a spell up here in the front porch? Johnny and I don't see a lot of company since the war began. Davy knew that Grandpa Jake was born before the Great War, and Daddy Chuck fought in World War II. But those wars had ended. Davy was not quite sure who the United States was fighting these days, but he would think on that later. For now, the smell of sarsaparilla filled the air, and Johnny rolled over on his back to request a good belly patting as he basked in the warm April sun. As Davy and Miss Irwin rocked away the cares of the world, Miss Irwin unconsciously fingered a cameo portrait with one hand and offered Davy some sarsaparilla with the other. Davy uncorked the sarsaparilla and drew a long cold drink. "Wow! This has a kick, Miss Irwin. This is the finest soda I've ever tasted." Davy could discern the distinct features of a handsome young fellow in Miss Irwin's cameo. Miss Irwin smiled as Davy offered some sarsaparilla to Johnny, who was already quite addicted to the sweet substance. "Thank you, Davy. That's mighty kind of you. My pa had quite a hankering for sarsaparilla, so I used to fix a batch for him at least once a week." Davy looked towards the interior of the modest home. "Where are your folks now, Miss Irwin? Are they still sleeping? Johnny and I will settle down if they are." The Irish lass pointed towards the far edge of the field at two rough crosses and newly turned earth. "My ma and my pa are over there, Davy. They both passed recently." Davy was genuinely sorry. "Gosh, Miss Irwin, I'm so sorry your folks passed away. Did they die of measles or chickenpox? I just had them at the same time. I was one big red scab, and I only got out of the hospital a couple weeks ago." Miss Irwin spoke softly as Johnny quietly whimpered. "No, Davy. Ma and Pa did not die from the English measles or from chickenpox. They died from heartbreak, because there is no cure for that." Davy had never heard of such a thing. "Oh, wow, Miss Irwin. I really am sorry. What broke their hearts so bad that it killed them?" Miss Irwin shed a tear as she fingered her cameo portrait a little faster. "My older brother, Jeffrey, went off to fight in the war. Pa was a Methodist preacher man, and he felt that killing and dying was wrong, no matter what the cause. He didn't want Jeffrey going off to fight. Ma felt that at 16, Jeffrey was too young to fight, whether the cause was right or wrong. And Johnny, well, he just misses Jeffrey so bad." Davy picked up Johnny and looked into his sorrowful brown eyes. Johnny reciprocated by licking some sarsaparilla off the tip of Davy's nose. Just then, Miss Irwin noticed a beautiful red rose inside Davy's left hand. The rose had somehow survived the journey through briars, brambles, and bugs. "What do you have there, lad? It looks rather lovely." "Oh, wow! I almost forgot. I brought this rose for you, Miss Irwin, to thank you for that swell bottle cap." Miss Irwin received Davy's present, and she closed her eyes to smell it. "It's beautiful, Davy, but it has no scent. Why don't you come over here to my side of the porch and pick a stem from this rose bush? Emmeline, Jeffrey, and I planted it some time ago. If truth be told, we planted that bush the day that Jeffrey left for war." Davy scratched his head and thought as he walked across the gray-painted porch. "Oh, Emmeline, you must mean Mama Mac. I picked your rose from a bush beside her house." Davy reached Miss Irwin's bush, and he snapped off a long green stem topped with a sweet-smelling pink rose. Davy blushed as he handed the stem to Miss Irwin, and she smiled. Then her blue eyes steeled as she drank in the scent from the rose. "Davy, the day we planted this Confederate rose bush, I purposed to stay here and pray unceasingly for Jeffrey's safe return. My ma used to say that if we kept praying and knocking on heaven's door, the good Lord would just get tired of all the noise, and he'd send us a sign." The young girl jumped up from her rocker. "Faith and begor, Davy, you could be that sign. It must mean that Jeffrey's near." Johnny began to whine and whimper at just the mention of his long-lost friend. Miss Irwin curtsied and kissed Davy warmly on his cheek in gratitude, and he purposed never to wash his face again. He wasn't terribly fond of baths to begin with. Davy stood straight and peered at the edge of the thick woods as he softly rubbed his flushed cheek. "Miss Irwin, do you think Jeffrey can find his way home through all those briars and brambles? It's a mess out there. Mama Mac has a pair of clippers at the house, and I can cut a path through those woods for Jeffrey." Miss Irwin stood up straight and put her hands on her hips. "Why, that's a capital idea, Davy. Simply capital. Would you please? Johnny and I would be eternally indebted to you if you would help see our Jeffrey home." Davy jumped up from the rocker and wrapped his arms around Miss Irwin's petite waist. "I'll go grab those clippers and get started today, Miss Irwin. Jeffrey won't lose his way in those woods as long as there's life in these bones." Miss Irwin kneeled to look Davy straight in his wide blue eyes. "Here, Davy, please take my Confederate rose to Emmeline and tell her how much I miss her." Davy hugged Miss Irwin, scooped up Johnny, and kissed his furry snout as he flew off the porch towards the gray, misty woods. "Please come back soon, Davy. Johnny and I already miss you." "I'll see you all again, Miss Irwin. I promise." And to young Master Davy, a promise made was a promise kept. The thick woods quickly engulfed him as Miss Irwin tearfully waved goodbye from her front porch. Johnny howled mournfully by her side. The thick briars, gray fog, and unrelenting bugs tormented Davy as he hurried back to Mama Mac's house. He could not focus on that. He thought instead of how awful it would be if Jeffrey returned home only to lose his way in the thick pine forest. Fortunately, the morning path that Davy had cut through the underbrush was still visible. He followed that path all the way to Mama Mac's backyard and her rear screen door. It was noon in his world. The screen door flew open, and Davy tore into Mama Mac's kitchen just as she served up his black-eyed peas and buttered cornbread. "Mama Mac, I need your clippers. I have to cut a path through the deep woods so that Jeffrey can find his way home." Mama Mac's eyes widened considerably. "Land sakes, child, where have you been? Uncle Van and Cousin Patty Ann just left. They said they dropped you off this morning after sunrise, but no one has seen hide nor hair of you since. You must be starved, darling. Sit down and have some lunch." Davy pulled out a chair to sit down on the sedge. He ate as he spoke excitedly. "Gosh, thanks, Mama Mac. I am powerful hungry. I thought I would never find Miss Irwin's house through all those woods and bugs. The chiggers are just terrible this morning." Mama Mac laughed as she poured Davy some fresh milk from Aunt Margaret's dairy farm. "Davy, you have quite the imagination. I haven't been able to find Miss Irwin's house since I was a little girl." Mama Mac paused and stood straight. "Davy, where did you hear those names? And just what did this Miss Irwin look like?" Davy swallowed a mess of black-eyed peas. "Oh, Mama, Miss Irwin is the prettiest thing to ever grace God's green earth. She has ginger red hair and rosy pink cheeks. She had on a frilly white dress that just shone in the sun. She even called you Emmeline. She said she misses you. She gave me this rose and asked me please to give it to you." Davy handed the fresh-stemmed Confederate rose to Emmeline. She hesitated for a moment, and then she drew it up to her nose. Tears quickly formed in her eyes. Mama Mac nearly swooned as she caught her breath and groped for a chair. She looked up at her kitchen calendar. It was April 12th, 1961, and it was circled in red. "Davy, when I was a little girl, Miss Irwin, Jeffrey, and I planted her Confederate rosebush by her porch when Jeffrey left to fight in Mr. Lincoln's war. That was the last time I saw Miss Irwin." Davy smattered some honey on his cornbread. "That's right, Mama. I don't know any Mr. Lincoln, but Miss Irwin said exactly the same thing. She asked me please to cut a path through those awful woods so that Jeffrey can find his way home." Davy jumped up from the table and hopped up into his mama's lap. "Mama, did you hear me? Miss Irwin says she misses you and Jeffrey needs our help. Miss Irwin wants him to come home." Emmeline slapped both hands on her knees. She was the steel and steel magnolias. "Reason be hanged, child. Time's a-wasting. Grab the clippers and take my hand. Our friends need us." At 105 years young, Emmeline and young Davy flew into the gray woods and sprayed the forest with peals of laughter to keep the fog, bugs, and briars at bay. But try though they did for the rest of that day, they could not find the modest white house at the edge of the deep woods. So Emmeline and Davy grafted her fragrant pink rose onto the unscented red rose bush beside her wooden house. Before Emmeline passed, the lovely pink roses completely took over the red rose bush, and to this day, Davy faithfully waters Miss Irwin's Confederate rose. The end.